So as mentioned before, this is episode 40, which is really part 2 of this one long season finale episode. This episode will be focusing mainly on Phil Spector and whether in fact he might be innocent. His first trial was a hung jury, so there's definitely reasonable doubt there. The forensics really do back up his story at least. So could it be that he deserves a retrial and people need to look into this further? So why don't you listen, make up your mind yourself about Phil Spector. We'll be talking to Paulette Brandt, to Kelley Lynch, to Seth Davis from 2 Real News. Thanks very much, and thanks for listening for the last 40 episodes. I hope you'll stick with us over the break we have, and we might still do the odd Sentinel chat or Sentinel debate or do some news updates, so keep tuned to the channel. Truth Sentinel on YouTube, Truth Sentinel 2 on YouTube. There's also a website, just type in Truth Sentinel with Scott and type in Wix, W-I-X. I'll be hoping to make a better channel later on, a better website. So thanks for listening, take it easy, bye. So another quick news roundup. You can see the article there, Why Do We Pick Our Nose? Great investigative journalism from BBC. Ukraine rebels want another 100,000 men. And so it's clear that they're gearing up for a full-on war. And unless someone tries to stop this, this is going to escalate into something huge, potentially dangerous for the entire world. And definitely going to be costing thousands of lives. And if you see center right there, is Russia stoking war? I would say everyone's stoking war, but particularly America and Europe are basically, they have the power to stop this. And so does Ukraine and so does Russia, really. Between them, they could stop this. Here in Thailand, there's been some small explosive devices gone off. And it just shows that wherever you go in the world, wherever I go in the world, there's always something happening, someone trying to kill someone. And this should be something that governments of the world are trying to sort out. In fact, to be honest, I'm starting to think we could do a lot better without any governments, you know. We could sort it out ourselves. We don't need these kind of incidents to be occurring. Inmarsat launches second Global Express satellite, and lots of technical details and some nice interesting figures about how expensive this is, and a 6.5 ton platform and investment of 1 billion, satellite out to a distance of 65,000 kilometers. But this is the company that pointed everyone to an area of the sea where MH370 is supposed to be, but still not found yet. Here's an article about how people are going to be offered chips, microchips under the skin to access buildings. It's already happening in Sweden. Would you accept that? We'll just have a quick look at entertainment and arts. Katy Perry spectacle wows Super Bowl, and she comes out on a giant kind of beast on this giant tiger. And we talked about how perhaps her and Lady Gaga are linked to MK Ultra. I don't know if it's true. We're just sort of saying that a lot of people say that. But anyway, we're going to talk about Phil Spector next. Talk about the trial. He had the first trial, which was a hung jury, and then the second trial where he was convicted of second-degree murder. I'm going to start off by talking about some details about the case, and then I'm going to talk to Seth Davis from 2 Real News. Then we're going to go back to Kelley Lynch, and then we're going to speak to Paulette Brandt, Phil Spector's former assistant. And we're just going to be looking at whether perhaps he should have a retrial and look at the facts behind the case and let you decide. Why don't you send us some voicemails with your opinions after listening to the show? Okay, so some brief background on the case anyway.
That Be My Baby sound, I guess it didn't come easy, did it?
Spector sound took a lot of work and creativity, and it was a bitch to get, and it was in my mind. And I told you I used to envy Motown because they could go in and get the same echo there. And so you listen to a Motown record, you can't tell the screams from the Four Tops. They had good songs, catchy songs, but the same sound. It would take me days. I'd go in and record for days, never get the same sound, have to throw away thousands of dollars worth of studio time, and Motown would have 10 hits in the same amount of time because they had the same sound, and it was a hit sound. Everybody had to go the Walrus sound.
Just speak your mind, sir.
I think there's maybe something we could read back. I don't think that's the case.
Okay, thank you. We don't have juror number 10. I assume, is that your position or not? You may be speaking on behalf of the other jurors. You think there's something...
The defendant is sentenced to the term required by law, 15 years to life on his conviction for second-degree murder for the enhancement pursuant to 12022.5a, the personal use of the firearm. The court selects the presumptive midterm of 4 years for a total of 19 years to life.
I'm Phil Spector, and I've been accused of the most heinous crime. The only women who have come forward that have said anything that had to testify under oath were the ones at the grand jury, and they lied. I can prove they lied by simply asking them to take a polygraph test.
It'd be good just to stop for a second and consider Lana Clarkson, the beautiful young actress. I say young because I still think 40 is young anyway, who hadn't quite achieved her dreams but was successful, maybe more than she knew. She had some success in the past. People considered her quite talented at what she did, and she had a lot of people around her who really loved her. It's a tragedy, absolute tragedy, and nobody would want to get someone free who was guilty of killing her. Nobody knows for sure what happened apart from maybe Phil Spector. But it's worth looking at the evidence in this case. So before I speak to Seth Davis for a bit of background into the Phil Spector trial, I'll give you a little bit of background myself first of all, just so Seth can fill in the gaps, and then we'll speak to Paulette Brandt, Phil Spector's former assistant, and before that we'll speak a little bit more to Kelley as well, Kelley Lynch. So, why are we talking about this? Well, we're talking about whether people should get a fair trial, whether money can get you free, whether being a celebrity helps you or hinders you. In this case, it may have hindered Phil Spector, as the LA legal departments may have been looking to prosecute successfully their first celebrity. We're going to be talking about the science and the forensics behind this case. And that's a fairly big part. I mean, it does tend to weigh in Phil Spector's favour. And in this kind of case, that's all you've got to go on, really, when there's two people in a room and one of them's dead. Scientists can be influenced, though. I mean, if you look at both sides, if you look at the defence and the prosecution, they both pretty much back up their client. And that's kind of, I think maybe that's something that needs to be looked at. Maybe there should be independent scientists. Because, if your job depends on what you're going to say, it must influence them sometimes. Let me know what you think about that. Juries, can we trust juries? I mean, juries can make illogical decisions. I mean, look at the Kelly Thomas murder. You've got a video there of the police basically beating a guy to death, but they're still not convicted. No, that's fine. So you can see that juries can't always be trusted either. That was a clear case of police brutality. And, on the video he said, "I'm going to F you up," It's obvious what went on there. Okay, what about the chauffeur in this case? Because the chauffeur was a big part of the trial of Phil Spector. He basically said, and I've heard 3 different versions of what he's supposed to have said, that I think I killed somebody, or I think I killed her. I mean, I've heard 3 different versions. If you look at Wikipedia, there's a different version. We'll talk a bit about that. And, his level of English wasn't that great. That is a factor for sure. We'll talk about what he first said to police. We'll also ask whether there was vendetta. maybe between people like Michelle Blaine, the chauffeur. Was there anything going on in the background? That should have been checked out, maybe. Anyway, so just a few details. So it was 2009. Spector was convicted of second-degree murder for the 2003 shooting of Lana Clarkson in his California home, and he was sentenced to 19 years to life. This all happened on February the 3rd, which is today, so probably a good day to release this. February 3rd, 2003, found dead. Lana Clarkson found dead in Spector's mansion. She was found slumped in a chair with a single gunshot wound to her mouth, broken teeth scattered all over the carpet, and they played a factor in the forensics showing that this looked like it was a self-inflicted shot due to the scattering of the teeth. There's a lot been talked about suicide. I mean, it's possible, but it could also be an accidental suicide. Phil Spector said she kissed the gun, and he told people privately that she may have been sort of simulating what she might do to him, things like that, An accident seems more likely, but, who knows. So Phil had just met her at the House of Blues. He didn't know her before. Ironically, they were watching an old movie in the car on the way to his house called Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, which turned out to be a bit prophetic. Detectives interviewing the chauffeur, during their interview, they were asking whether he was sure about what he'd heard. This was on February the 3rd, 2003, and his response was, well, I'm not. It's my English, it's my English. So there is definitely doubt there. I mean, we can't rely just on that. And that was a big factor in the trial, what he said, and maybe a big factor on people believing that Phil Spector's guilty. It's slightly dubious. There's definitely doubt there. Okay, so there's also testimony from women who said that he'd pulled a gun on them. It should be pointed out that they never pressed charges against Phil Spector for doing this. In fact, there's actually little evidence that it actually happened. And most of them continued seeing Phil Spector afterwards in a relationship status, which sort of shows you that this was not a frightening occasion enough to make, if someone held a gun to your head and you thought your life was in danger, you wouldn't continue dating them. So there's definitely problems here. And these are kind of jilted lovers. Are they the best people to call in to testify against a man who could end up in prison? Anyway, there is obviously reasonable doubt here because the first trial of Phil Spector finished in a hung jury, so they retried Phil Spector, so that seems a little bit dubious in itself. It's like, keep trying someone until they're found guilty. It's a bit strange. Anyway, the retrial began on October the 20th, 2008 with the same judge, Judge Fiddler. Maybe they should have got a different judge as well, because it suggests that, if you've got the same judge, it suggests that they actually think he's guilty and they're going to try again, basically. So Phil Spector's currently serving his sentence at the California Healthcare Facility, California State Prison, and he'll be 88 years old before he's eligible for parole. Another problem with the testimonies of some of the women, it showed evidence of coaching by the prosecution team and some unlikely stories. One of them suggested that Phil had stopped her leaving the house at gunpoint and that she'd slept in a chair that night with her bag hung over her shoulder. This seems extremely dubious because Lana Clarkson was found with a bag slung over her shoulder. It's clear reference to this fact, and it just sounds to me like this has been coached into her to say that. She wouldn't have said that normally. Plus, it seems very unlikely. So she's saying she slept in a chair. Was Phil watching her sleeping all night and stopping her from leaving? It sounds unlikely. You can't sleep in a chair anyway, so presumably she was awake. Why would you leave your bag on your shoulder? Is she worried Phil Spector's going to steal it from her? I mean, he's an extremely rich man. He doesn't need to steal it, so she would just let it drop to the floor if she actually wanted to get some sleep. It sounds very dubious. It really does, and I don't believe that she made any complaint to the police at the time and continued dating him afterwards, I believe, although check that one out. I know that some of them continued dating him afterwards. Then you've got all the stories in the background, there's a lot of hearsay, the Ramones. There was the stories that, they'd been prevented from leaving the house. But if you actually investigate some of these stories, it's actually not true. They don't, they revealed later on, no, that they could have left at any time. In fact, there's a video on YouTube of one of the Ramones saying he didn't believe that Phil Spector had it in him to kill someone. A lot of these are rock and roll stories spread by the media, and if you actually investigate, there's not a lot of truth in them. Now, a lot of the forensics do back up what Phil Spector said. all the evidence points that Phil Spector was not holding the gun in Lana Clarkson's mouth. A lot of the evidence points to the fact he wasn't close enough. Most deaths resulting from a gunshot wound intraorally inside the mouth are inflicted by the person holding the gun. Lana Clarkson's DNA and gun residue is on the gun. Phil Spector's isn't. That's highly significant. There's no evidence the gun was clean. There was still blood on the gun. Just jumping back again a bit randomly to the chauffeur. So on February the 3rd, D'Souza said he could not be sure what Spector had said, but later on he said he could be sure, and his English had improved significantly later. Obviously, he is being paid for by the state to do this, and he was also granted residency in the States as a result of this trial. Now that surely is dubious. When they first met D'Souza, it was made known that he was in the States illegally and he could have been deported. Now he's offered a carrot here. If he testifies, he'll get paid, plus he'll get to stay in the States. I mean, that's a rare opportunity for a lot of people. It shows to me that he perhaps shouldn't really be even used as a witness in this case. I would say that there's a lot of evidence to show that that's not an acceptable witness if you're going to offer people things like that. Now, D'Souza also said he saw Phil Spector come out of the house with the gun. Now this is interesting, since there's no evidence, there's no residue on Phil Spector, there's no DNA on the gun from Phil Spector. So this is very dubious. Did he speak to Michelle Blaine before calling the police? There's evidence that he may have done. Did they have a vendetta? You know, it'd be interesting to know the relationship they had. Michelle Blaine there was a nasty court case afterwards between her and Phil Spector, which Phil Spector won. They settled out of court. So there's grounds for a vendetta, even if he didn't know it at the time. So the gun was a Colt 38. There was a holster found in the drawer in the foyer. Nobody took any DNA off the holster. I find that very strange, because it might have shown who picked the gun up in the first place. Phil Spector's jacket is of relevance. There was no attempt to conceal the jacket or any evidence at the scene, and the jacket shows only minuscule blood spatter, not enough. If someone had fired a shot from close range, this would have been covered in blood, so this is extremely in Phil Spector's favour. Another thing, Phil Spector was 5'2" and 140 pounds. Lana was 6 foot tall and 160 pounds. She could have, easily won in a struggle, but there was no evidence of a struggle. Now, if someone was trying to stick a gun in your mouth, I think there would be evidence of a struggle. So there's some dubious things there. Dr. Lakshmanan agreed that it's difficult to force a gun into someone's mouth. Dr. Pina and Lakshmanan said that intraoral gunshots are usually suicides or self-inflicted, and the trajectory of the bullet in this case suggests that it was a self-inflicted shot. Doctors concluded that high level of alcohol and drugs that Lana Clarkson had taken could have led to an accident. She had way more than Phil Spector, tequila and drugs, and Phil Spector actually had far less alcohol in him than maybe people have been led to believe. Clarkson's mother and friends said there was no evidence of suicidal tendencies or depression, and that may be the case. It's only one suggestion, although there was a film producer who testified that in the days before this incident, his name was Gregory Sims, by the way, he observed Clarkson depressed after drinking, and she was crying, very unhappy about her career and relationships. Sims said it was an extreme state of depression. She said she wanted to die. This is, of course, one person's testimony. How do we know he's telling the truth? But if he is, this is extremely relevant. Vicodin was the drug, by the way, that was found along with tequila in Lana Clarkson's blood. Gunshot residue was found on Clarkson's hands. Partial residue was found on Phil Spector, but this was not conclusive and could actually be just, from the police station, or it was very, very small amounts, or it could be from the police car. Anywhere where guns are present, basically, he could have picked that up. Lana Clarkson's blood alcohol level was almost double Phil's. There was Vicodin and Benadryl. But anyway, I could go on. We'll continue talking about this with Seth Davis, our researcher from 2 Real News. and then we'll go on to speak to Kelley Lynch and Paulette Brandt. So today I'm going to chat to Seth loosely about celebrities, their troubles, people being targeted, whether people are guilty or innocent, and whether we trust our legal system. We're going to look at two loosely connected cases, but at the moment we're going to start with Phil Spector. Later, one of his former managers will be joining us, and we'll be talking about all kinds of things, whether celebrities have an advantage or a disadvantage in court. Seth, hi, by the way. How are you?
Hi. I'm doing all right. Tired as always there, but burning the candle at both ends, man.
Absolutely, I know. I'm feeling exactly the same way, but I'm sure we're like a lot of people out there. We're all working hard to sort of get along in life and pay the bills and everything. We all think we've got our big problems, but I guess we've all got problems. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say.
Oh yes, absolutely. But we make it work there. We make time for this because it's something that's important enough to you and myself, and we feel important enough to the audience there that a lot of people are hungry for this information and type of information, but don't get it via mainstream sources. That's right.
It's right. And one thing I was going to say about the mainstream as well, which I heard today, which I totally agree with, is the lack of emotion from newsreaders on TV news. It's like they can talk about massive atrocities with not a glimmer of emotion, and they're trying to stay neutral, but it's just not the real world, is it? I think with at least with alternative media, we can say how we feel about events as well.
Oh, agreed. Actually, have emotions like human beings.
Yeah, human beings.
It's only when it's scripted, when you have that scripted laugh for a story or whatever. Then ha 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 ha. It's pretty robotic.
First of all, what do you think of celebrities? I mean, I made a comment in the last episode at the beginning about the Pope and how 6 million people turned out to see the Pope, and it's almost like worshipping him, and I feel like people do that with celebrities as well.
Agreed. I don't think they should, because people. Yeah, it's not a bad thing to have role models. It's just you definitely should have role models that are quality human beings, of men and women that are actually men and women of character, of integrity, of intelligence there, and not just somebody that happened to be in a TV show or produce a song that you like or something like that. There's no reason, no matter what, to start worshiping someone. It goes pretty far. And I, and I'm sure anyone in the audience there has seen it become this, of people just getting wrapped up in the minutia of the media, as opposed to actually giving a damn about stuff that's really important.
Yeah, right. A lot of people seek fame as well. People looking to sort of leave their mark in society and look for to have a significant life, and so people want to be famous. But I suspect the reality of it isn't always as it's cut out to be. A lot of celebrities have a lot of troubles, and that's what we're going to touch on today, is kind of like the lifestyles of the rich and famous and the problems that come along with it as well. They're not gods, basically. They shouldn't be worshipped.
No, agreed. There are people like you or me, and it doesn't do them any favors when you give them leeway for all sorts of stuff that no regular individual would get that kind of leeway for, and you let them get away with any of a number of things, or you indict them of any of a number of things just because they're famous.
Yeah, and Phil Spector was pretty famous, wasn't he? He's one of the biggest American record producers, songwriters.
In the 1960s, yes, absolutely.
He's supposed to be the originator of the Wall of Sound, isn't he?
Yep.
On tracks like.
Technically, we're talking 1950s to 1960s, but all the way into the 70s, Spector still had a definitive presence in music.
Yeah. I wasn't really familiar with the story of the killing, which we're going to be talking about today, of Lana Clarkson. How big a story was it in the US?
Pretty big. I'm going to be completely blunt with you. I was about 10 years old at the time, and February 3rd of 2003 when this happened. But
I hope you were focusing, listening to the news intently, knowing that 10 years later you were going to be on a podcast.
yeah, it works, man. Somehow I didn't pay that much attention at the time, but it was actually a fairly big story. It's one of the many things that the media used to distract people from quite a number of legitimately important events going on around the entire world. I mean, of course, it's 2003 there at that point. We've already got the agreement of the invasion of Afghanistan there and Iraq, and so yet somehow nobody really cares because, I mean, Phil Spector.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed from me, from the research I did, because I didn't know much about Phil Spector, but it seems to me he had the kind of personality that didn't really endear himself to people in general. Is that what you came across as well?
Yeah, he's kind of an introvert sort of a guy, very quiet guy, very perfectionist type of a guy with a lot of his music stuff as far as production and everything, and was really, really, well, you just say a perfectionist, just obsessed with the music itself and the sound itself, and knew what he wanted and wanted what he wanted. There were no two ways about that. But he was also a very quiet guy that could be overlooked by quite a few people very easily.
Yeah, I saw him working with John Lennon, and he just seemed really, really quiet. He wasn't really saying much, and John Lennon was getting annoyed with him about something. And allegedly, that's one of the instances where he went out and got his gun and then and fired into the ceiling. You know, I found a lot of these stories though about waving guns around. It could be these are just kind of like
baseless accusations.
Yeah, kind of like stories that the fables that get told to make celebrities sound more interesting sometimes.
Oh, agreed. I just did a big thing the other day there on how Mr. Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, a famous show back in the day here in the United States. That guy was not a Vietnam sniper or a Navy SEAL or anything like that. I mean, the man was never even in the military, but because of urban legends, people will believe just about anything, man.
They will, yeah, and it sort of suits the media as well. I mean, there's lots of stories you hear about Spector waving guns around, and the Ramones, the group, the Ramones were one story, but I read them being questioned on it, and they said no, he didn't threaten with the gun. You know, they could have left any time. So people sort of like to make these stories because it makes everything sound more interesting. So I think people have to be careful about that when you come to a court case. You know.
Oh, agreed. Especially once. I mean, the type of a mentality that had been propagated there had been propagated well before 2003, but it has really been propagated since, especially at the time of the trial and everything, because then they really wanted to push it. They really wanted to push that image of crazy Phil Spector, the bad guy and stuff. And look, I don't know what happened there. You don't know what happened there. But at the same time, it's pretty obvious from the way the media had portrayed things how they were going to, that they'd already judged it.
That's true, actually. If you go on YouTube and watch some of the TV coverage, you know, the anchors are definitely biased towards him being guilty because of his personality. And even some of the guest lawyers on the shows are sort of saying, hang on a sec, you know, this personality is nothing to do with it, you know. We're talking about murder here. Did he kill someone, you know? And the forensic actually are way in his favour. In fact, you know, I mean, anyone who says this is an open shut case I would say is wrong, because I mean there was a hung jury on the firt trial, so you know they couldn't convince a jury that he'd done it because the forensics kind of point him to being a bit further away. There wasn't much of a blood spatter on his suit. It was microscopic. And this woman was much taller than Phil Spector, much stronger, could handle guns. So there's definitely some questions to be asked. But like you, I'm staying neutral. But I'm just saying that there is questions for sure as to whether he's guilty.
I believe let's just do a basic overview of the case here of the night of February 3rd, 2003. Phil Spector, at age 64, music producer of the Beatles, Ike and Tina Turner, the Ronettes, and everything at one point in his career, is older man at this point. He's pretty much completely retired from everything there, and gets back after a night out at the House of Blues in L.A. Of course, this is kind of a more of a playboy, as Spector was even into his senior years there. Leaves and goes to the House of Blues with one woman, comes back with a hostess from the House of Blues, Lana Clarkson, age 40, who herself was an actress and had been in quite a few roles, especially the one that you and I were talking about before the show here, the Swords and Sorcery role, where she was like the Amazonian woman.
That's right, yeah.
She's a very large woman. Spector is a very, very small man. That's why I said about him, not just personality-wise, but physically, he's a very mousy type of a guy.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't seem like if he was in a struggle with this Lana Clarkson, she would come out the winner for sure.
Oh, agreed. He's a 64-year-old man. He's a senior citizen that is. Oh man, I don't have the exact height right here, but
I think he was like around the 5'5" mark. I'm not sure what that is in centimeters though. Yeah,
I know he had to wear platform shoes and everything to try and make himself on the same height there as a lot of the people around him, or even close. Yeah,
and she was tall, strong, and younger, basically. I mean, one of the two ladies that we're going to be talking to later said that she could have drop kicked him across the room, basically, and yet she's found dead in a chair. I mean, she couldn't have stayed sitting down during any struggle, so. I don't know. It's a bit dubious. There's questions to be asked for sure.
Oh, agreed. Well, this happened in the quote castle in Alhambra, California, which is a suburb of L.A. there, Los Angeles, and this Phil Spector's home it's a mansion, it's a manor, an estate, whatever you want to call it. I mean, they call it a castle, and to be completely honest, one can be forgiven for coming away with that sort of a take on it, but. It's a very nice house in the hills there, and thus it garners a certain amount of attention with it. But Spector brings this woman home, and having their party there and whatnot. And later on, Spector's chauffeur hears gunshots. A Brazilian American man by the name of Adriano de Souza.
Just a quick advert break. Our email is scottsentinel9@gmail.com. Check out our past episodes. We've got lots of interesting guests, and you can find us on YouTube on 2 channels. We talk about conspiracies, mysteries, injustices, corruption, religion, war, peace. You can leave your own message, and we can base our show around what you think. That's what we intend to do. You can find our website on Google. Just type in Truth Sentinel Scott and WIX, and it will come up. You can find latest episodes there. You can help us find the truth hidden deep within mainstream media. Find our YouTube channels. We've got all the episodes on there. Truth Sentinel and Truth Sentinel 1. Subscribe to both so you get notified of everything. Click on the About section. You'll find all the links. Have you got something you'd like to advertise? If it's truth related, honest and ethical, get in contact. You can help us. We can help you. We sell our own t-shirts with the greatest enemy of truth is blind belief in authority on the back. Just $20 plus postage and packing. Let us know your size. Just send us an email. We can sort it out. We've also teamed up with trutht-shirts.com, and they make political t-shirts. Let people know where you stand, basically. Use the code TRUTH1. You get a 10% discount, and we get a donation. They make all kinds of political t-shirts, and they can customize them for you as well. If you've got any ideas for publicity stunts, get in contact. We need to escalate this channel, make it much bigger. We need your help. Please support us. Thank you.
Adriano de Souza, the Brazilian-American chauffeur who worked for Phil Spector there, reported a murder to 911, allegedly saying that he'd seen the body of a woman and had heard shots there, and he had called 911. However, as they brought up in court during the trial, that Souza called Michelle Blaine, who was Phil Spector's assistant at the time, before calling 911 to report the death.
Yeah, now I heard this too. Now, why is this significant, do you think?
I think it's interesting that if this is a situation in which this guy's panicking and everything, and first and foremost, his thing would be to call an ambulance, because he doesn't necessarily know that this woman is dead or whatever if he's outside, according to, as he said in his testimony there or whatnot. But however, what he told the 911 dispatcher is that, and this is something that was quoted throughout the trial of trying to say that Phil Spector admitted to murder, is his chauffeur saying that my boss says he just shot someone.
Yeah, and later on it turns out Michelle Blaine, that was her name, right?
Yes.
She had a falling out with Phil Spector, didn't she? And there was court cases going on there as well.
Yes.
Right?
Well, this was 2003, and the case that just proceeded there. The trial went on for a long time over that, all the way up to the first trial went to September 26th of 2007, and ended in a hung jury, which thus was declared a mistrial. And that during the period of time there, from September 2005 to February of 2007, was a series of lawsuits there after this immediate falling out between Spector and Michelle Blaine. Of course, Michelle Blaine makes the claim that Phil Spector is just being irrational and trying to attack her and everything, and get her to be complicit in murder there, and that's why she turned on him and tried to leave there and started attempting to try and testify against him. Whereas Spector sues her for embezzlement and for $425,000 taken by her, and then $635,000 in home loans that were never repaid to Spector. And in 2005 later, or 2006, Michelle Blaine starts a lawsuit against Spector, which ended up being unsuccessful, but was for $5.25 million for sexual harassment and wrongful termination. However, she lost her suit as she agreed to drop it when Spector won his suit against Michelle Blaine for $900,000 U.S.
So it's all quite messy, basically.
Extremely.
And you wonder behind the scenes what the relationships were between sort of, who did people have allegiance to? Did the chauffeur like Phil Spector? Was there any reasons for any vendettas and things like that? You wonder what could be going on behind the scenes in these cases.
Yeah, and why it would be Michelle Blaine would be his first call and not 911. Also, the second trial, 2 years later, because of course still at this point the prosecutor really just has it out for Spector at this point during his second trial, and don't let anybody tell you there's such thing as double jeopardy there. He was convicted during a second trial and sentenced to 19 years to life on May 29th of 2009.
Yeah, well, how come? Do you know why the double jeopardy law doesn't apply in this case then?
I believe there's a difference between a civil trial and criminal trial.
Okay.
I don't know, but or of course you have state prosecution and all sorts of stuff. But you don't have to follow the rules when you're the government.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, and then some people have suggested that perhaps after trials such as O.J. Simpson, they were getting kind of tired of the fact that the celebrities were kind of getting away with murder, literally, in some cases, and they were using. Some people are sort of saying that they were using Phil Spector as an example here, basically.
Yeah. Well, and regardless of whether or not he was guilty, they were going to get a guilty verdict against him, even though that didn't happen the first time. Also, the fact that many of these self-same people from the prosecution did everything they can, and have still continue to this day to do everything they can to character assassinate the two jurors that voted put out their vote for not guilty for Spector, thus making it a hung jury and a mistrial.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's really classy when you're trying to character assassinate people who find that there is not enough evidence beyond a reasonable shadow of doubt to convict Spector of murder, and yet those people, if you're a prosecutor, are just apparently morons or something, and you've got to have another trial so you can get him. And it's ironic that many of these people who are part of the quote justice system and believe in the justice system don't appreciate it when it gives them answers they don't want.
It's strange, really, isn't it? I mean, it makes you wonder, there must be a lot of innocent people in prison because, you've got a case here where they've done it once. They can't come to they can't find him guilty, and yet the same details basically, maybe reworded, or maybe they brought in some other witnesses, and then he goes down for 19 years. It's the same story regurgitated basically. Nothing's changed. It just shows you the thin line between being in prison and not being in prison. It's kind of slightly worrying, you know.
Well, I think the importance of those two jurors, as much as they've been character assassinated since by all these people of alleging that they don't understand what beyond a reasonable shadow of a doubt means, they do. And the fact that without full evidence that somebody has committed a crime, they will not convict them. Those people are what we need more of in the United States and around the world, period. We need those people in courtrooms all over at jury trials, because those people are the people that are going to save lives.
Well, absolutely, and this entire case against Phil Spector, it's almost based on character assassination, basically, because the forensics are fairly in Phil Spector's favour. I mean, definitely. I mean, the circumstance itself: two people in a room, a gun goes off. It's dubious, and certainly Phil Spector's reactions afterwards. I've got questions. I haven't heard a really detailed account of what he says actually happened, and I find that slightly strange. I would want to tell people. He got the chance on YouTube. There's videos on YouTube, and if I get the chance, I'll put them on this episode. But I think I may have some problems with usage rights and stuff like that. But
putting it lightly, yeah.
On those videos, he had the chance to say, no, this is what happened, but he didn't, basically. So that's a problem. And I'll tell you another thing that I look for when people get told they're guilty, basically. I always look for their reaction. There seemed to be no reaction whatsoever, but that in itself isn't much either to go on. It's just a personal thing, maybe. But I'm still neutral, but I still say, there's a lot of questions to ask whether this guy is actually guilty,
Yeah, well, it's enough there that you understand why someone would not want to just convict someone without having all the evidence there, because with what evidence they did have there to those individuals did not seem to be enough. Yet many people there are under the illusion that just because a prosecutor gives you paints you a certain kind of story, just because a defense lawyer paints you a certain kind of story, that's exactly what happened. When in reality, both of their perspectives have certain things about it that are correct, but they also have quite a few things about it that are totally skewed, just to their perspective, just to their liking.
Yeah, I mean,
to try and paint the narrative they want to paint.
I mean, some people wonder whether there's been some kind of accident here. I mean, there's two theories that I've heard that sound sort of credible. One more credible for me personally than the other. Yeah. One is the suicide thing. I'm not convinced by that one, just because I've seen some interviews with friends of Lana Clarkson, and people paint different stories about her, saying she was depressed. Yeah. And a guy I saw today, a close friend, said she wasn't depressed. She was the life and soul of the party. She was very excited about a Marilyn Monroe production she was just about to do. She was a very positive thinking person. The only way I think the suicide thing might be true is if she'd taken enough alcohol and drugs that she'd sunk into a sort of a deep depression. But it doesn't sound so credible to me.
Somebody that might seem some way on the surface to other people doesn't necessarily feel that way on the inside. I'm sure every last person that will listen to this understands that.
Oh, no, that's true,
yeah. Because you're perceived in a certain way by other people doesn't mean that that's necessarily how you feel on the inside, man. But regardless, yes, I get you there on that one. What you were going to say of the other theory there in favor of Spector?
This is just a personal thing. The thing that I find more credible is that either Lana Clarkson on her own, with Phil Spector in the room, has this gun, wherever it's come from, she's got it in her hand, and she's just joking around. She doesn't realise it's loaded. And there's apparently Phil Spector's even said this unofficially, that she put it in her mouth and said, "This is what I can do to your cock," kind of thing, Yeah. And she was just larking around, and the gun went off. or Phil Spector may have been involved, and they were both larking around with a gun, and it went off, and she got killed. Basically, that sounds more credible to me than suicide, really.
Yeah.
And I can't see a struggle. I really can't see that. She's way too strong for him. She would have seen him coming. She wouldn't be sitting down.
Yeah, over 20 years, his junior. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't buy that really. And the forensics point to him being at some distance away. Nobody disputes that she had her hands around the gun, and it's in her mouth. That so she's holding the gun and it's in her mouth. All the
and
the
experience
forensics
with weapons there in the first place, also.
Yeah, all the evidence.
Whereas Spector had, other than stories from people in Hollywood there of him brandishing guns, or in the media, what major experience does Spector have there? Also, I would add that the prosecution continued to say that Spector had guns, quote, everywhere in his house, yet at the same time were willing to imply that it is completely ludicrous that Lana Clarkson would have found one herself and used it.
I don't like these stories,
Somehow
to be honest.
Ridiculous.
I don't think people should be prosecuted on stories, because stories are completely different according to who tells them, aren't they? I mean, the prosecution will give one story, the defense will give another story, and I've seen people saying, I've seen people saying this girl was very depressed. Of course she killed herself, and I've seen friends of hers saying that she wasn't depressed. They're talking about the same person. They've got completely opposing stories. You can't convict someone on these stories. You really can't do that. And it seems to me that this case is about character assassination and stories, and the forensics don't really match up so much.
Oh, agreed. I mean, they allegedly have the blood splatters there on a white shirt of Phil Spector's there, but of what was shown, the spots there, you can't even see them with the naked human eye, so we're going to pretend that they were washed away, but the forensic evidence that we ignore in all other cases, somehow we pay attention to right here.
Yes, it seems to have been a bit dismissed, doesn't it, the forensics here?
Yeah, well, despite them, certain forensics that falls in their favor of having been just jumped on with every bit that they could possibly muster, but the vast majority of it being ignored.
Yeah, and basically there's the prosecution are sort of alleging that yes, Lana Clarkson had the gun in her mouth with her hands over the gun, but that Phil Spector had his hands over the gun too, and there was a struggle, but it doesn't seem credible for a woman her size to be struggling.
We're talking about a fairly small gun there, but a fairly heavy gun nonetheless, a Colt Cobra 38 snub-nose revolver. No wimpy gun by any means, and also not really something that's just going to go off by itself. You've got to pull back the hammer and then pull the trigger with a fairly heavy action there. It's not exactly just easy to shoot. Also, the fact that somehow this guy, who is in terms of physically infinitely weaker than Lana Clarkson, puts a gun into her hands, puts the gun into her mouth while his hands are on her hands, and makes her pull the trigger. That doesn't.
It doesn't quite add up, really, does it? I mean,
no, it doesn't.
And also, this guy's got a lot of money. He can still, despite the fact, he might be a bit eccentric looking, he can still have a lot of women if he wants. If he wants just sex, he can pay for it if he wants. And apparently, this time he was dating people like Nancy Sinatra. And a string of all sorts of waitresses, hostesses, anything you can think of, from all sorts of his favorite Hollywood hangouts and whatnot. Yeah. So is he really going to say goodbye to that? Man. Is he going to say goodbye to his entire life just because this one woman may have rejected his advances? Yeah, that seems a bit ridiculous to me. Yeah, it does. There's definitely. I mean, we're not saying he's innocent. We're just saying, well, the evidence sort of points more in that direction than perhaps than the character assassination. You can't just say that people wave around guns. I mean, a lot of these are kind of Hollywood stories, I think, that have just been exaggerated. Well, and agreed. And I mean, how many people that are in let's just go take a different pace here, how many people that are in Hollywood movies or whatever, that if something like this were to happen, they would say, oh, no, this guy, there's no way he'd do that. Or vice versa, would be, oh, he waved guns around in this movie and that movie. Of course he'd be willing to kill someone. I'm like, that's neither here nor there. Yeah, I mean, of course, if he didn't do this, I mean, there's two women I think who testified that he did threaten them with guns. They would have to be. There's accusations that they're lying.
Yeah, well, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned.
There could be, yeah. That's the thing that you can't really know from someone's testimony. Is there a reason why they might say that? You know.
Yeah, well, it is indeed. It's as with later with Michelle Blaine with all this stuff of her attacking Spector and everything, when obviously she has a reason to be pissed off at Spector of the fact that she tried embezzling money from him, then was successful there for a while, and then got caught and got slapped on the wrist for it. Had to pay him back $900,000. I'd imagine she does have a bit of a motive there for not necessarily just, I don't want to say outright lying, but yeah, let's call it what it is.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and you don't know how many other little sub stories are going on in the background as well with people who these celebrities. He wasn't the most well liked person, was he? So there could be a lot of people who want to.
There's a lot of people out there that would like to just offhand, as you brought up with reporters in the media and everything, of the way everyone had already made a decision about him and already judged him without looking at the facts.
Yeah, exactly. What was I going to say next? What other kind of things? We'll probably have to wrap up soon anyway, and sort of wind down on the Phil Spector story. I mean, one of the things I wanted to say was that the other person that we'll be talking about will be Leonard Cohen, and he does have some links to this story. Number one, they collaborated together on some of their music, and number two, there's some alleged possible secret meetings where Leonard Cohen may have been one of the people that testified that Phil Spector used to wave guns around. That's only allegedly, I might add, but there is talk that he may have been one of the people that confirmed that Phil Spector waved guns around. Yeah,
and I mean there are connections between he and Spector, the case of Kelley Lynch, also. Cohen, in his entire thing, has been played up on one level of looking down on Phil Spector, just about as bad as anybody else, but he shows to a certain degree of how his attack in the media and everything on Kelley Lynch is similar to how, in my opinion, of Michelle Blaine there, of somebody that you would say there's no reason to attack this individual whatsoever or anything, and then you see pretty immediate financial reasons behind it, personal and financial, because in the case of that, once again, not only hell has no fury like a woman scorned, but of course nothing hurts quite so much as the human heart, man. And people, passions of the heart, crimes of the heart there run deep. Grudges run deep.
River Deep, Mountain High. That just sprung to mind because you said that. That was one of Phil Spector's tracks. One of the tracks that Cohen and Phil Spector worked on was the 1977 album Death of a Ladies' Man. In this case, we're talking about there's been the death. Cohen was a bit of a ladies' man, so we're going to probably move on to talk about that.
Too ironic, huh?
Yeah, we're probably going to move on and talk about that next. But was there any last things you wanted to say about the Phil Spector situation?
Not so much as just to let people know not to jump to any conclusions on anything before you've actually really thoroughly looked at a situation, but to also remember that if you're ever on jury duty, which I know people just absolutely hate there, that it's your job to not convict someone or to vote for guilty or put in your thing for guilty there if you don't have enough evidence to convict them beyond a reasonable shadow of doubt or beyond a reasonable doubt. Period. If you've got kind of a half-assed case there or something that, oh, well, he could have or he might not have, that's not enough. Period.
It's true. People like to, supposing people have a negative view about Phil Spector anyway, then they hear that someone's died in his mansion.
It's like, oh yeah, and then he's a murderer.
Yeah, they just jump straight away. I must admit, I didn't know much about Phil Spector, but I'd heard a few negative things about him. And when I heard this story, my initial and just hearing the rough circumstances, he's alone in the room with a woman. My initial reaction is, yeah, of course he did it. Of course he did it.
That's literally the exact same as when we started talking about this case, to bring this up. To be completely honest, I'd never put that much thought into it, Scott, until we really started looking at it, and then it changes. But I have a feeling that happens with just about every case. I mean, as you brought up O.J. Simpson there before, I'm sure if we were to actually look up his individual case of all the details there, we might feel a little bit differently. But if we, as a culture, did that with court cases of not just famous people, but with just about everybody there, the society would be a lot better off.
It would, and I was saying that to Anthony as well, that sometimes, we investigate stories and our opinions change just with a sort of 5-minute investigation into a story. And
sure.
we get fed a lot of rubbish by the media. But at the same time, you can use the same media to actually piece together what really did happen if you just spend 5 minutes doing some research as well.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's something that, like the audience, like anybody there, we're just people, man. We're trying to figure this out the same way everyone else is trying to figure it out that's listening to this program right now. Everything we do is, I mean, your perspective on stuff will change with all this information. I mean, that's pretty much just what's supposed to happen. There's a lot of stuff you might have felt one way about when you started doing the show that you definitely don't feel the same way about now.
Absolutely, that's definitely true. My opinions have changed big time over the last sort of 20 years. So any younger people listening, just bear in mind that what you believe now isn't necessarily what you're going to believe 20 years later when you've sort of thought more about things, you've learned more about things, you've studied more about things. Opinions are going to change, and it's the same, looking into cases. But I thought we could have a bit of a chat about Lana Clarkson and just talk a bit about what she was up to. I mean, she was like many girls who go to Hollywood, hoping to make it big, and she did have some success. I was looking at some of what she got up to in her life, and she's been in some movies and as sort of Xena warrior princess type films, and she was a big fan of Marilyn Monroe. Did you come across anything about her life?
Yeah, she'd not been the most successful actress in Hollywood there, but then again, who really is, other than a select group of people, man? Everybody's got their own run of it, and if the defense, as far as Spector's attorneys and everything, were correct as far as their of what they said, that Lana Clarkson was suicidal and everything because of the beginnings of a failing career there, then that is too bad that's what she gauged her life by. And I'm not saying that's what happened or that's what it was, but if that was, then that is too bad. And I do believe that beyond anything, that is the true tragedy of this event, is that regardless, Lana Clarkson is dead. It's a tragedy. A woman's still dead. She had a family. There are people that loved her to death, and that's a tragedy. Phil Spector's in prison for what amounts to the rest of his life. That's a tragedy.
Yeah, there's a lot of tragedies in these stories. I mean, yeah, she had fans. I was looking at her site, which is still up actually, www.lanaclarkson.com. And if you go on there, there's a forum there, and she's obviously got a bit of a following anyway. This was before she was killed, so it's not like people are sympathising.
Yeah.
It's a shame, really. People sometimes, it'd be good for people to realise that they've already got some form of success, and they can be happy with that as well. I just got a message pop up on Facebook saying Whitney Houston's daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, found unresponsive in a bathtub in her Georgia home. And it just just reminds me how everyone seems to be aiming for this perfect life as a pop star or celebrity. And if you look at what, of the lives and the ends of these people's lives, and just looking in the media and what we see happening to them, it doesn't look like that much of a sort of heavenly kind of lifestyle, does it really?
Oh, agreed. That's why so many of these celebrities are some of the most unhappy people on the planet. Because money doesn't buy happiness.
It doesn't, and I think people can achieve success in their own sort of sphere. They don't have to. It doesn't have to be on a worldwide stage. And in fact, when it is, it seems to end in trouble, basically.
Always, more money, more problems, as the old saying goes. But I mean, let's just ask there: how many more people are going to have to die? How many more people's careers are going to have to be ruined? And how many more people are going to have to be put in jail before enough is enough between any of these people, man. Honestly, Lana Clarkson dying is the real tragedy of this. Phil Spector being put in prison for what amounts to the rest of the days of his life is the real tragedy here.
Yeah, it is a tragedy, and we don't know for sure that he is innocent, but I can say for sure. But looking at the evidence, it's dubious. I don't think he got a fair trial, and I wonder if anyone really gets a fair trial these days.
That is the million-dollar question there, Scott. Does the justice system even really work? Because, I mean, who was wrong? The jurors in the first trial or the jurors in the second trial?
Yeah, exactly. And, you bring on all these... One thing I found strange reading through the proceedings in the court was just bringing all these experts, scientific experts in, and they're both saying completely the opposite things. One's working for the prosecution, one's working for the defense. And... they're saying the opposite things, but they're supposed to be scientists, so I don't get it, I just think it's totally flawed, the whole system.
Oh, agreed. Well, there's so much of this is people's personal vendettas against one another, and if you've noticed, the money between them has destroyed their relationships, even as tentative as they were beforehand. A lot of these people's lives have been completely ruined by the money because they start into lawsuits, they start into bickering over who took what, who has the right to allocate what funds where and everything, and it just destroys the basic humanity between these people. And while I know some absolutely horrid things have happened and have been said between these people, I really would love to see these people bury the hatchet and to get over it, man, because this is in the past, and the only way these people are going to continue to grow is to grow into the future.
I agree. I mean, I can understand it might be really hard though when some terrible things have happened, to you.
I know.
But I think maybe the time to do that is right at the beginning. I think if you can alleviate problems from the beginning, so they don't ever develop into a situation where it's it's almost a situation of no return. But I think there's always hope, and let's hope in the case of Kelley and of Leonard Cohen that something positive could come out of the end, and that somehow they could work things out. That'd be great. So if Leonard Cohen's listening, maybe take that on board. And with Phil Spector, I think at least a retrial would be in order. And if he is innocent,
Agreed.
then it would be great if he could, get that verdict, and if he's guilty, then fine. But at least he deserves a fair trial, I think.
Agreed, because I mean, who's going to decide what trial was the fair one, what trial was the right one? And because the prosecution would have you believe that the jurors in the first trial were just a bunch of morons that didn't get it, or vice versa. The defense would tell you that the jurors in the second trial were the morons that didn't get it. And I don't know, nothing's quite so clean with any of this. As we were discussing before the show here, none of this stuff is quite so squeaky clean, quite so set up as as Hollywood television or music or movies would have you believe. That life is filled with all sorts of thorny details that, especially in a court case like this, the prosecution and the defense would both like you to ignore.
Well, and there's also lies as well. I mean, who's lying in these cases? You've got people saying Lana Clarkson wasn't in any way, has always been happy and wasn't suicidal. You've got a film producer saying 2 or 3 days before this incident she was very, very depressed, crying and drunk, and is he lying? It's really difficult to know who's lying and who's telling the truth. You've got women testifying that Phil Spector waved guns around and threatened them with guns, and yet they never went to the police about that. So 6 women are testifying that he did pull out a gun, yet none of them ever went to the police in the past. There's allegations that they're lying and that they received payment. You've got the chauffeur who, this is bizarre to me. He received residency in the US as a result of his testifying. That should never be allowed. Surely you can't get rewarded for testifying. And who knows if it was testifying in a certain way. He was called by the prosecution, and he gets a green card, and he got paid for it.
Well, agreed, and I believe if you look at Michelle Blaine there, as we discussed earlier, that there are certain factors that should definitely influence whether or not you decide that she is a completely unbiased witness there.
Well, yeah, bearing in mind that, shortly afterwards they settled out of court.
At $900,000.
Yeah, so, yeah, exactly. There's all kinds of sub-stories, and, it's difficult getting to the truth sometimes, but I think you have to try, you have to read the details, and you have to investigate. But we live in a world that's made, it's made harder to get to the truth with a media that have been bought off themselves, and with a system of law that we cannot trust.
Yeah, nobody really wants to spend the time and effort to get to know something, to really flesh out something, to try and find the truth. So many people are willing to just take the surface glean of all this and then just run with it, because after all, it doesn't affect my life or anything like that. And that sort of thinking is about as dangerous as can be, because if you don't care about somebody else there, then nobody's going to care about you when the time comes for you to be put on trial or for you to be accused of something you didn't do. And so that's always an interesting dichotomy there, and also see how people put celebrities on a pedestal. This is, as we were discussing before the show here, is that people that are celebrities make the same mistakes and are the same mistakes that people like you and I make, and it's like a form of trying to live vicariously through somebody that you've pumped up or puffed up with all of this unreality, so unrealistic expectations, whatever you want to say, and you use that as a way to get away from the reality or escape the reality of the unfortunate circumstances of your own life and your own personal vulnerability.
Yeah, and I was going to say, in kind of contrast as well, that once they're up on these pedestals, they're very easily knocked off their pedestals. Like in this case with Phil Spector, the media just turned against him and just they'd all decided his fate almost, and they just spread that to the willing population who were just willing to believe anything they were told. And he didn't help himself, Phil Spector, with some of his antics. I saw a video of him sort of dancing around after the first trial. That wasn't a good idea, but the media, they're quite a powerful force as well, and people are too easily led to making decisions about someone. This wasn't a trial about his personality. This was a trial about whether he shot someone in the mouth. And if you look at the forensics, it's extremely dubious. So I just wrap up by saying, I think with the Phil Spector case requires further investigation, and let's hope things can work out with Leonard Cohen and Kelley Lynch.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to join you and talk about this. And I'd just like to leave people with question everything, especially the things that you hold to be sacred and what you never questioned before, your own beliefs and everything, and try and find the truth for yourself.
Thanks, Seth.
You're very welcome, Scott, and thank you to your audience. All right, goodbye.
Finally, we're going to go over to Paulette Brandt. Paulette began working as Phil Spector's personal assistant in 1991 and worked with him until about 2002, so a fair amount of time. For years, Paulette worked in Phillip's home in Pasadena, and it's important because this is the place where so many women had to allegedly escape from that house. So she'll be able to give us some background into whether these stories are true or not. Kelley Lynch will be joining us first of all, just to give her side of the story. Then we'll go on to Paulette. Finally, we'll wrap up the episode. Yeah, let's start off. Can I ask you, why do you think Phil Spector's innocent?
Well, I think he's innocent for a number of reasons. First and foremost, Phil has been rendered unrecognizable by the news media, and you can talk further with Paulette about this, but he's an absolute gentleman. I've been alone in his home with him. I've been, in New York City where I lived. He would visit there for months at a time. And after Marty died in 1988, I worked for Phil as his assistant for 2 years. I think it was 88, 89 through 90. He had a young son that died. That was very tragic, a twin. And after that, Paulette started working for him again in 91. She had worked at Apple Records, and she'll tell you all that. Well, the other thing is I met with Phil after the incident at his home, and he was talking about, he was very upset about he had been involved with Nancy Sinatra. And, the theory here is that Phil had to, according to the prosecutors, hold guns on women that wouldn't have sex with him, which is farcical. I've arranged some of these dates. I've spoken to some of these women, including one former assistant of his. So he told me, I asked him, did you kill this woman? And he told me what happened, that he walked into his foyer and this woman who's 6 foot tall, 160 pounds, who was quite high on Vicodin, had about 8 glasses of tequila, this is forensic results, was dancing around in his foyer with a gun, singing his songs, including Da Do Run Run. And, I do feel that I can tell when Phil's exaggerating, and I've heard him tell lots of good rock and roll stories in my day, funny ones too. And, this is precisely what the forensic science concluded.
What did he say happened next after dancing around with the gun?
He said she just shot herself. He doesn't know why. He rushed to her aid. They accused him of trying to mop up the blood, which I find absurd because he went outside. I think he asked the driver to call 911 and said the woman killed herself. He's a Brazilian whose English wasn't very good. And he told me what happened with the police. He asked them in. They agree with this. The police have this in the reports. And for some reason, he evidently did put his hands up. They didn't just go in. They tasered him numerous times. They tackled him. I believe they broke his nose. They injured his back. And, it's an outrageous story of abuse. A former investigator who worked for Chicago PD told me he believes that is where the setup of Phil Spector began, when he was wrongfully tasered. Now, I don't know. He was law enforcement. He probably has a better idea. So you asked me why I think he's innocent, for a number of reasons. I know women who testified against him who are lying. And Paulette is aware of situations. I was present at the Carlisle Hotel for the incident where he allegedly held a gun on Stephanie Jennings. He didn't have a gun. She snuck into his room, got into his room somehow, and he was upset. He hadn't been there. I stopped in unexpectedly. I was on a business trip. I believe there was another gentleman there, Jericho, I'm not certain. And this turns into a gun story. Well, Paulette, you can ask her about this. She was on the phone with the woman that day. A gun was never mentioned. The police came. I now have an email from NYPD, not about Phil specifically, but I am working on a book, and they told me he would have been arrested for having a gun and menacing. Instead, the woman was escorted out. They thought she was a prostitute. So that's one example of a situation where I know for a fact a witness is lying. And another is Diane Ogden, who testified against him. Said she worked for him as his assistant in 88 and 89 when I did, and she did not. So there are a lot of lies like this. Phil's the mother of his younger children, has known him for 40 years, lived with him in the Pasadena house where a lot of this happened, and assured me she's never once seen him with a gun. So, people that know him, Nancy Sinatra, Marvin Mitchelson, have all said that this is completely out of character. However, the news media has endlessly repeated stories about Phil and a gun, including all the Leonard Cohen versions, the Ramones. Marky Ramone recanted and said Phil never held a gun on him. They were not locked in. In fact, he said they had keys to get out of his house.
Yeah, I saw that actually. Yeah, he did say that.
So many people in LA, I'd like to point this out, have a lot of money and are wealthy celebrities. And they have all sorts of locks on their doors, their gates locked. They have dogs. They have armed response. This is not unusual. And Phil had a bodyguard years earlier. I think this, really tantalized the entertainment industry, musicians. He was a U.S. Marshal, George Brandt, and he was armed. Phil had an LAPD bodyguard, Jay Romaine. I think Paulette found him a lovely professional individual. So yes, Phil did have guns around him, and you can ask Paulette if he owned guns. That would be a good question for her. And evidently, according to Bruce Cutler, his lawyer, and other evidence. This gun was not even his. And this woman, whose madam said she was a prostitute, and other people have said she played with guns and told her best friend that she was going to buy a gun and blow her brains out. So, I mean, this is a down-and-out actress. You know, she's working as a waitress, waiting on people who she used to socialize with. I can assure you, Scott, that a woman that is over 40 does not have all that hopeful a career, who never really had a career to begin with. You know,
I've heard various stories on both sides. Really, some of her friends saying there's no way she would have killed herself. She was very happy. There was some things to look forward to, and then I've heard in the trial there was a film producer, I think, who testified a couple of days before the killing. She was distraught and drunk, and in a very, very bad way. So yeah, it's difficult. The problem with these trials, it's, you know, the defense and the prosecution, it's difficult to, when you've got completely opposite stories coming from different directions.
You know, these prosecutors come up with theories. Now, a theory that Phil Spector had to hold a gun on women in order to, because they wouldn't have sex, is a ridiculous. He was dating Nancy Sinatra at the time. You know, he didn't have trouble getting women, and, you know...
What about rejection in general, like if people didn't do what he said he...
Yeah, I've rejected him, you know, and I've been with him when he was drinking, and I didn't see him become aggressive. We have had arguments. We're very close. I'm friends, or I was friendly with the mother of his children and know his younger children. And I never saw anything like that. Phil is a relatively calm individual. He has very good manners. This is my perspective, okay? He's quite funny and witty. He tells great stories. You know, he's had a lot of wonderful experiences. And I also would like to point out that this man suffered through the loss of his father, who killed himself, and John Lennon was shot. Also, Lenny Bruce was a very close friend with him, and Phil actually bought the death photos so that nobody would see these shots of Lenny Bruce. He's a thoughtful individual, and, you know, he's not somebody that would jeopardize someone's life at all.
Before we move on to speaking to Paulette, can you tell me, give me a little bit of background into Michelle Blaine, and whether you think she might have had a bit of a vendetta against Phil?
Well, I think she did. I don't know Michelle Blaine personally. This is what I know about Michelle Blaine. I saw her blog, which is now private, and I was in shock at how vicious she is. Now, Paulette dated Phil years ago, maintained a friendship, worked inside his home, and worked with him the last time for 12 years. It seemed to me that Michelle Blaine targeted Phil, stole almost $1 million from him, got rid of Paulette, got rid of Jay Romaine, the bodyguard, and got rid of Morgan Martin, a lovely man who also worked for me, and he was Phil's driver, and isolated Phil. Apparently his wife, Rochelle, brought the theft to Phil's attention. So in any event, Michelle Blaine immediately, I wrote and said something on her blog I posted, you know, that this is unconscionable statements about Phil, vile. And she immediately started slandering me, and she was all over. Stephen Ginelli, my stalker, had a blog. That blog was essentially dedicated to Phil's trial, second trial, and what he seemed to do is set up probable reasonable doubt theories, so that people would come on his blog, like Michelle Blaine, or this woman Sprocket. There were many blogs organized to target Phil, and that's the only news that was getting out. The media didn't cover the second trial. So my point about Michelle Blaine is she has said to the news media that Phil wanted to marry her, okay? It's laughable he was involved with Nancy Sinatra, and I can assure you, Scott, that Phil Spector didn't lend her $1 million. I don't know that he would lend me and Paulette $10,000.
Wasn't she convicted of that anyway?
Yeah, she was found guilty in a court of law or settled with him. And also, you know, this is really unlike Phil. And he was shaking. We don't know what kind of medications he was on. You know, from the first trial, he looked tortured. You know, I mean, the things that have been said about him, right down to his hairpiece, I mean, he wears one because he almost died in a car accident and had his head ripped off. You know, I mean, I don't know why he has been demonized over his looks. You know, it's shocking to me. So anyway, Michelle Blaine, I don't think he wanted to marry her. Why wouldn't he marry Paulette? She worked with him for 12 years solid leading up to this situation. She was in the Pasadena house. Why wouldn't he marry Janice, the mother of his children? She lived with him at the Pasadena house. It makes no sense. This woman has some kind of a vendetta against him, and it seems to be similar to Leonard Cohen, that she has misappropriated money from Phil, as Cohen did for me. The intellectual property I'm owed is worth millions, and then went on a campaign to slander him. And really, if you think about it, people engaged in criminal conduct normally do not confess and tend to blame the other party. Yep. So that's what I think her motive is. I always say to Paulette, to me, Michelle Blaine, whose father worked for Phil for years, and said in 37 years he never once saw Phil with a gun in the studio, okay? And he was on the Leonard Cohen sessions. Well, in any event, I would assume that Michelle Blaine grew up hearing about Phil. Perhaps there was some kind of jealousy. And, you know, that she felt entitled to whatever she took.
Why don't we move on and have a chat with Paulette now and find out what she's got to say about Phil and his innocence, and then you can Kelly, you can be there on the side anyway, and come and join us at any time, and I'll have a chat to you at the end as well.
Okay, great. Here she is, so Ms. Paulette Brandt.
Paulette Brandt, welcome to Truth Sentinel.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So you worked for Phil for about 12 years until 2002, is that correct?
Yes, that's the last time I worked for him. I worked for him before that as well.
And that was when he was involved with Apple Records?
Yes, yes.
Is it true you also dated Phillip in the 80s as well?
Yes.
So you know him quite well. I wanted to start off by asking if you could describe his character a little bit to us.
He's one of the most interesting people I've ever known. Totally fascinating, fun to be with, reliable, good friend, someone I could always count on, whether we had been in touch or not. He has been in my life my whole entire adult life. And it's really... there's a void. And I never thought he'd end up where he is now. It's so cruel.
Do you think Phil ever thought he could possibly end up in prison as a result of this case?
Never. I think that he believed he would be found innocent because he is innocent. And that's why he didn't fight more, because he knew he was innocent.
And have you ever witnessed any of this violent behaviour that's been put out in the press?
No, and I've seen him in every situation we could imagine. Never.
Including when he was young, yeah?
Yes. God,
including when he's drunk and things like that?
Oh, yes. Yes, he could be not as fun when he was drunk, but he certainly wasn't violent. I mean, he's a little guy.
Well, we haven't talked about that at the moment. I mean, he was quite small, wasn't he? 5'2", is that right?
Something like that. He wore those heels, or the beetle boots they called them.
And Lana Clarkson was about 6 foot, wasn't she? So you think that? I mean, the court case basically says that the whole case rests on the fact that the gun was put inside her mouth. Do you think he would be capable of doing that to Lana Clarkson?
I don't think so, no. I mean, she's a huge woman, and he's a little guy.
And he didn't know her.
No, he didn't know her that well, that's for sure.
And why do you think why do you think some of these women have testified against him? I think there were 6 women in total.
Well, they had their 15 minutes of fame. And they also, a lot of them sold their stories. So basically for money and attention. People do that.
And I saw Phil made some videos that are on YouTube, which I'm going to try and put on the show if I can as well, where he offered them some money, I think, in a check if they would take a lie detector test.
That I don't doubt for a second.
Hey, Scott, Paulette and I will take one for $100,000.
You bet. You bet.
How about his? You've described a bit about his personality. What about his physical appearance then? I mean, he's about 5 foot tall. Would you say he's strong?
Not, I mean, it didn't work out. His strength was in his brain.
Right. Okay.
And that was what was really attractive, I thought.
And the same question I asked to Kelly was, how do you think he dealt with rejection, not just of women, but rejection in general, if he didn't get his own way?
I don't think he reacted any differently than most of us. I never saw any violence. Certainly, I've seen him everywhere. I could see him interacting with all sorts of people. But I don't think he'd ever put himself in the position he found himself in, not intentionally. He certainly never would have done anything that could have landed him in jail. The whole thing is so outrageous. It's hard for me to believe it really happened.
What about guns? I mean, did you ever see Phil waving guns around?
No, he never waved any guns around. And I've been in the studio with him. I've been in social situations with him. His bodyguard had a gun. He was a police officer, Gerald Maine, and so did his previous bodyguard. But and he had some guns, but no, never did he wave them around. And I can't see anybody who'd been threatened with a gun ever going out with him again or seeing him again. And all these women said that they saw him after. And that doesn't make any sense to me at all.
That's true, actually. I mean, some of these stories these women said they would have been extremely frightening. He was threatening, telling them they couldn't leave, holding up guns, and yet they did see him for a very long period of time afterwards in some cases.
Yes. So that does not make sense to me.
Would you say he was a gun enthusiast? Would you go that far at all?
No, not really. No, he was more a musical instrument enthusiast.
Yeah. And
yes.
Were there guns available around the house? I mean, did you ever see them sort of lying around or in drawers or things like that?
Well, when he moved, there was like a display case where he had a few guns, and we had discussed whether they should be, operational or not. And it didn't make sense to me if somebody was breaking into your house to say, "Excuse me while I load my gun." So I felt that any guns that he had for safety should be loaded. So there was a display case with some guns, and that maybe, I don't know. I was told that the gun was not his.
Yeah, that's I wanted to talk about the gun a little bit. I don't know if you'll know some of this, but I mean, according to the court case, the gun, there was an open drawer with the holster there, and then there was the gun, obviously, which was used either by Phil or by Lana. Nobody actually did any DNA testing or took any fingerprints from the holster, which I find really strange, because surely whoever's prints are on the holster is the person that took the gun out in the first place. So, for example, if they did check it and there was no fingerprints or DNA from Phil, but there was from Lana, then it would suggest that she'd picked up the gun in the first place. So I thought that was really strange that no one had checked that. What's your opinion of the actual gun itself and why it might not be his?
Well, I really wasn't there. I can't speculate. So I don't know about that gun.
No, fair enough. What about the? I'm sure you followed the case. What about the idea that it was an accident, or do you think it's possible that it could have been if they were both drunk and they could have both been fooling around? It was an accident, or do you think there's more chance it was a suicide or maybe an accident on her part? What's your personal opinion of what might have happened, just based on what you've heard, and why do you think he's innocent?
from what Phil told me, and I did see him after, he said that she had said to him, "This is what I could do to your."
It's okay, you can say it.
Okay, he said this. She said, "This is what I could do to your cock," and she put the gun in her mouth, and it went off. And so I believe it was an accident.
Yeah, now see, that sounds quite plausible, but then what I don't understand is why then Phil Spector's defense team would then say it was a possible suicide, because if that's what Phil said had happened, why would they start talking about suicide? Because that sounds to me like she's just joking around and there's an accident.
Well, they don't know.
I definitely think it was an accident.
Yeah, I must admit it sounds more credible. I
personally think it's for a number of reasons. One, the DA advised the coroner, I'm sorry to interrupt Paulette, and you advised the coroner not to investigate it as a suicide. That is the way a self-inflicted gunshot wound is normally referred to, as a suicide. And his lawyers were very clear that they did not know if she killed herself intentionally or if it was an accident. They don't know what was in her mind. And also the forensic evidence and testimony proves Phil wasn't actually drunk. He had about 2 drinks over the course of the entire evening, I believe.
Whereas they tested her alcohol levels and they were pretty high, weren't they? A lot of tequila and some drugs as well.
Yeah, from what I can tell in the forensic evidence.
And
I don't think it would be that easy to get a gun into somebody's mouth.
Well, no, it wouldn't. I mean, this is part of the situation, really. It wouldn't be easy to put a gun in someone's mouth. If it was a suicide, then all the forensics point towards a suicide or an accident, basically. I mean, the forensics are definitely on Phil Spector's side. I mean, the gun residue is on Lana Clarkson, almost none on Phil Spector. Did you actually see the suit at all?
I gave him the jacket.
The white jacket, yeah.
Yes.
Did you happen to see the jacket afterwards?
No. I didn't see the jacket, so.
I mean, I'm sure it was kept as evidence. I just meant like a photo or anything. I haven't seen it myself.
I've seen it. There's a few, really a highly inconspicuous amount of blood spatter. And, talk to Paulette about this. David Mamet did a film with Al Pacino and Helen Mirren, and he recreated the situation where what would happen if you shot someone at point-blank range. You would be covered in blood and tissue. Covered, including your hair and shoes. And he had some spatter on the back of his arms, I believe, and Paulette can talk about that.
Yes, I know whenever we'd take a flight and we'd hit turbulence, he'd throw his arms up. That was his reaction. So possibly when the gun went off, he threw his arms up. But if he put a gun in her mouth, he'd have to be standing right there. He would have been drenched.
Yeah, no, I mean, the forensics definitely, they definitely put the whole thing into question. One thing I did want to ask, though, that I find is missing a bit from this case is a really detailed description of what actually did happen from Phil Spector. Do you think it would have been of any benefit for him to go up on the stand and testify, or do you think that would have been problematic?
Well, I don't think he testified because he was innocent, and he never thought it would end up this way. When you get up on the stand, especially with these fairly sleazy people that you're dealing with, they can trick you into all sorts of things that sound the other way. So it's better if you don't testify. And I really didn't think that he thought it would end up this way because he was innocent.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking of the details, like how far away does Phil say he was from Lana Clarkson when the gun went off? Those kind of things,
6 feet, he says.
6 feet. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it does seem to be based on the character assassination. Do you think there could have been more of Phil's friends could have spoken up or even attended the trial or even been witnesses, and there could have been more witnesses to testify that he wasn't a violent person and didn't throw wield guns all the time.
Well, it's very strange out here. Our police are not your friends. And I think a lot of people could have been frightened.
You mean because of the initial when they came in and knocked him over and broke his nose and tasered him, that kind of stuff?
Well, it's just if it could happen to him, it could happen to them. Because once they get you, they can do anything. And they do. Look what happened to Kelly. They can do anything.
Yeah, we've seen that from some of the police brutality videos and some other stories we've heard about police corruption. Do you think there's any possibility that there could be any attempt for a retrial with Phil? Whose responsibility will it be? And do you think there's anyone who's actually trying to do anything about this?
Well, I'm hopeful. But it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. Next, they got the celebrity.
But he is fighting it in federal court.
Yeah, you mentioned that they'd tried to bring some evidence or tried to appeal, and it's been a year since they did that, right?
I think it's been about 2 years now.
I think it's been 2 years, Scott, and then in July, I believe, quite a while ago, Phil was rushed to the hospital, apparently. We read this. And his lawyers filed a motion asking the federal judge to please expedite this matter. He's had it for 2 years now, and this man is gravely ill. He's lost his ability to speak, and he's in the hospital ward. So, months and months have gone by, and still nothing. One cannot imagine a federal judge sitting there deliberating for 2 years. I sent you the document, and it's very, enlightening and really does give Phil's version of events and the science.
And how do you think Phil is coping in prison? Do you think he would be the kind of person who would deal okay in that situation, or do you think he'll be struggling?
I think he's having a horrible time. I can't imagine.
Have you heard from him at all since he's been in prison?
No. Which is very unlike him.
Do you think maybe he's not allowed to communicate too much with the outside world?
It's possible. I mean, I've known him all my life. And even when we weren't in touch every day, we still always were available to each other.
I did get a letter which said, and he knows who I am, and he knew who he is writing, that Phil Spector is not going to respond to any mail he receives. And please keep in mind, Scott, that the DA is highly connected to law enforcement, jail guards, etc. So, whatever he says could be misconstrued and used against him. I'm sure he's been given legal advice about mail.
I know the other day I came across one woman who says that she's writing to him, and she even printed one of his letters. I think it was in the press. So, you wonder whether these are genuine or not, really.
Interesting that it was someone he didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this was someone he didn't know at all, a complete stranger. But the letter's printed. You can read it on the internet.
Paulette is also a witness here, right, for a lot of issues, I believe. So that could be another reason.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't too bad. I mean, I don't know if it said anything too incriminating, but I think he was protesting his innocence anyway, so that was good. Let's just have a quick chat about the driver. I mean, I was reading the court information, and it is true that I think his name was D'Souza, was given permanent residence in the US as a result of testifying against Phil Spector. Do you believe that could have been an incentive, and just an incentive to say what he said in the trial?
Absolutely. Oops.
And his wife and maybe his mother, I think.
That's right. I believe his whole family's here now.
Yeah, and I think he didn't just get that, he got something else. I don't know if it was financial benefit, whether he got paid, but he certainly got quite a nice package out of that. I mean, it does seem slightly dubious to me.
I definitely agree with that. It's unreal.
Yeah, it's a strange system sometimes. I mean, we've got a different system in the UK, but it's got its own problems as well. I mean, there might be similar. I'm not a legal expert, but I mean, I was listening to a lot of the doctors, and there was some compelling evidence. As Kelly said, there was Phil had some of the top scientists and doctors around the world, basically, and they came up with some very compelling evidence. But then the scientists and the doctors on the other side, who probably weren't as actually so well respected internationally, came up with completely conflicting evidence. I mean, it does seem to be the way that people just come up with, there's two different stories and people have to try and piece it together. What do you think convinced the jury in the end that Phil was guilty? Because the previous trial, it was a hung jury, so they couldn't quite convince the jury that he was guilty. What do you think swayed it in the end for the second trial?
Well, I understand the judge was out to make sure this one happened. And I believe if he had another hung jury, they would have tried him again until they found.
Yeah, it does seem strange. If there's a hung jury, I guess was that why it was tried again, because it was a hung jury? Whether it, as well, if he'd been found innocent or guilty, then it would have been over. But because it was a hung jury, they went for a retrial. Is that how it works in the States?
Well, they don't have to go for a retrial. They have the ability to go for a retrial, and I believe they would have done that until they found him guilty.
Okay. What would you say to anyone who's listening who is totally convinced that Phil Spector is guilty because of what they've heard in the press and the stories they've heard about him being violent and things they've heard from the prosecution in the trial? What would you say to help convince them that Phil Spector is actually innocent of this crime?
Well, nobody who knows him ever said any of those things about him. So many people who actually don't know him. And I found that very interesting. They never even called on me at all. And I've known him all my life. It just seemed that they were going after a certain verdict, and that's what they were going to get. And everything that's been printed has been geared for that. But no one who knows him will tell you they think he's guilty.
Was there anyone involved in the trial that did know him, that defended him or even spoke out against him? Was there anyone that you know that he definitely did know well and who was involved in the trial?
I guess it was Nicole who spoke on his behalf, his daughter, who obviously knows him well.
Mm. And she gave him a character reference.
She said it was like being in Archie Bunker. She and her parents would watch TV at night. And she's written an article, you should look it up, that's called That's Not My Dad. It's very, very heartbreaking. This is a girl whose brother died of leukemia, or died of, I believe, leukemia at a very young age. And, she's been through a lot of tragedy, and now her father's in prison. She rarely gets to see him, according to her article. And she was very charming on the stand, evidently. She's a lovely, poised young woman. Paulette knows her quite well, and Paulette knows Phil's other sons also, who have not been as supportive. So you might want to ask her about that.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I don't know the names of both of them, but I know the name of one of them is Dante. That's right, it's Dante Spector. And I read online that they've been less flattering about Phil and sort of talk of abuse and things like that. What do you think about that?
I don't really know. I know Dante, and I knew I couldn't fully trust him. but I never knew Phil with the children. But I know that when Gary needed help, Phil helped him.
That's right, Gary. Yeah, Gary was the other son. Was Phil close to his sons?
Not as close as they would have liked. But Phil didn't have a really great. His father killed himself, as you know. So he didn't have an example as to what a father really has to do, and it's quite a responsibility, I'm sure.
Well, he was a great father to Paul and Phillip Jr.
Much better, and of course he was older.
Yeah, he's older.
But he didn't have a really great...
Also, he didn't have that kind of contentious relationship with Janice, the mother of the younger children, that he had with Veronica Spector. And as you've noticed, she's bad-mouthed him for years, but was not on the witness stand. I'm sure they could have impeached her testimony. So those children were adopted by Phil and Veronica, who then divorced, and it was a mess.
Well, it was. But Nicole knew him the best.
And Phil's married, remarried to Raquel, is that right?
Rochelle.
And she's campaigning Phil's innocence as well. Have they been together a long time?
Well, she was involved after I left. So I believe she was working with Michelle Blaine, actually, and discovered the theft that was going on and let Phil know about it. I'm sure Michelle Blaine was just like anybody else who gets busted. They turn around and they start bad-mouthing the person who busted them. And she's had a really good time doing that. But, I mean, she stole about $1 million from him. And I guess it's her way of pleading innocence by making him a bad guy.
Yeah, I think she even made some comment that when she was leaving, he threatened her with a gun as well, which...
Yeah, I believe that, yeah.
Sure.
There was someone else, one of the people who testified as well, said, I thought was very telling, actually, that she'd obviously been coached by the prosecution to say what she said, because she said that basically Phil, this was one of the 6 women, I believe, Phil wouldn't let her leave his apartment, threatened her with a gun, and so she sat in a chair all night with her handbag over her shoulder, which of course is exactly how Lana Clarkson was found. And I just thought that was very unlikely. Unlikely that someone would sleep in a chair. She said she slept in the chair. I mean, you don't sleep in a chair with a handbag over your shoulder, really.
I think that was Diana Ogden. Most women don't sit there with their handbags over their shoulder when they're waiting to leave either. They usually put it on the ground in front of them.
It sounds to me like she was told to say that, basically, about the handbag, because it just fits in, obviously, totally with the Lana Clarkson, how she was found. So that looks very dubious to me. There's a lot of dubious things about this case. But before we wrap up today, was there anything else either of you wanted to say about Phil Spector, the situation?
Well, I did notice on the ballot that was it Jackson?
Yeah, Alan Jackson, the prosecutor.
Yes, he was saying that they should vote for him because he's the one who prosecuted Phil Spector.
These cases advance people's careers here, Scott.
And right on the ballot, your voting ballot. It's pretty amazing, but that is how it works here. It's really corrupt. It's quite corrupt.
Very corrupt. I mean, what Paulette and I have witnessed just with my own prosecutor is shocking. Don't you think, Paulette?
Unbelievable. Never would have believed it if I hadn't seen it.
If you don't see this, you can't believe it.
Yeah.
And my experience with the DA's office has been extremely unpleasant. In fact, I had to call them. I was advised to call them by the city attorney's office about the SWAT incident. I've tried to find out about King Drew. That hospital's entire file is falsified. It has my name, but the wrong Social Security, date of birth, place of birth. That's very sinister. In any event, they told me, their investigator, to call the FBI and tell them Merry Christmas. And as we talked the other day, my colleague, when I was working in Colorado, said it sounds like something the Sopranos would say prior to riddling a body with bullets.
Right.
Like, in other words, they sound like gangsters. And that's what my experience has been with some of them. I've had nice experiences. In fact, Scott, I would like to say one thing. First of all, I'd like to just say that Paulette Brandt is a wonderful human being who has really saved my life, number one. And Phil is very fortunate to have her, speaking on his behalf. And the other thing is I have talked to two investigators on Phil's case. One is investigator William Freya, also investigator Brian Bennett, both at the DA's office, and Detective Mark Lilienfeld at the Sheriff's Department, who handled the crime scene. And I would like to say, in their defense, that these men have been professional. Brian Bennett we ended up in a kind of antagonistic position, but these men are professional men, and I personally do not believe that they intentionally set Phil up. I believe Detective Lilienfeld said he's open to changing his mind, but he really, really believes, I think, that Phil murdered this woman. So I just want to be very clear that when we're talking about corruption and prosecutors who are corrupt and advance their own careers, not everybody here is corrupt, and some of them are highly professional individuals. So I just want to be very clear about that.
That's a nice note to sort of to come to a close on, and I mean, they're not all, there's some good police out there as well, in the UK there are as well, some people lay their lives down for people, and there's some good people who went into police to try and bring about justice, but like you say, there's corrupt ones as well.
I was in jail for 6 months. I worked with gentlemen, Captain Mark Gorman, Lieutenant Wallach, Lieutenant Allende, many people at the jail here in the Education Bureau, and these are wonderful human beings. Not one iota of corruption. Now, I know the FBI has investigated corruption at the men's jail. I'm talking about the women's. And I saw, for the most part, particularly in the command staff, nothing but professional individuals, especially in the Education Bureau, where they're working very, very hard with women who have been down and out, who aren't educated, who've had unfortunate drug addictions, whatever. So I've had very wonderful experiences with law enforcement.
And I do want to send you this card.
I'll read the card.
That I have that Nancy Sinatra sent Phil.
Yeah. So this was a card from Nancy Sinatra to Phil, yeah?
Yes. He was dating her, and it's very obvious that she cared for him, and he didn't have to go around looking for other women.
And this was at the time that the murder occurred. Sorry, not murder. The death occurred.
It was right around that time, yes. And would you like me to read it to you?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. The front of it says "Love you." The inside, not the part you wrote, it says "Always have, always will." Love, Nancy. And she wrote, "It's very painful to see someone so special to you pull away and disappear. What have I done to have this happen? I never realized how much I need you in my life. How happy you made me, also how miserable. I've never had anyone in such control before, and it doesn't feel very good. I'll always be there for you, your friend, ally, or lover, sister, or mother, but I'm here. The love will always be here." And she signed it, "Love, Nancy."
Yeah, that's nice.
I will say that when I met with Phil after the incident, he was very, very upset about Nancy Sinatra. I think he really cared about her also. And this was a very serious relationship for him. And she has publicly said, to her credit, that she cannot imagine Phil doing this. So he was upset. They had a very serious relationship, and she was quite close with Paulette. But Paulette's never heard from her again, and that does happen.
Yeah, I mean, it would be good if there was a retrial to get more people sort of reversing some of the damage that's been done, or at least providing some balance as to, you know, some women coming forward and saying how well they've been treated, you know, because it does seem a lot of the case was built on changing the public's perception as well. I mean, if you looked at some of the media, the news media, they were very, very biased against Phil Spector. You know, they all believed he was violent. You know.
About that. You know, a friend of mine works for a news media gathering agency in Canada, and he's told me that he has literally sat in meetings with editors who decided to go with the gun story when they felt Phil was innocent. So these stories sell. I've contacted journalists. The only outlet that removed the slander was Rolling Stone. I believe it was Andy Green. They don't care. Whatever is salacious, the more outrageous, that sells.
Yeah, true.
You know, it's sad. I mean, you're talking to two women who really care about Phil Spector, and I have been targeted by the DA, I believe, to some degree for speaking out about it. You know, so it's pretty shocking, and, you know, Paulette's quite depressed about the situation, I think it's fair to say. It's true.
Well, let's hope, even in some small way, that this, you know, this show itself, us talking now, there might be somebody listening who might just start to help bring about a retrial. You know, a lawyer or somebody that might be able to help. I think, I don't know if it still exists, but I think someone needs to look at the holster and take the DNA and the fingerprints on that. I don't know if it's still around though. But also, I think, you know, a lot of this is just character assassination, so that's easily reversed.
There wasn't a holster with the gun. There was a holster in a drawer, and nobody can prove if that was the holster for that gun.
Except it probably would have Phil's DNA on it.
The holster?
Yeah.
Well, you know, Scott, Paulette actually had a conversation with Phil.
Yeah.
About guns, you know, and keeping one loaded. And I was told by Bill Pavlik, Phil's investigator, who was at the crime scene after the incident, a couple of things. One is he felt Jay Remain, Phil's bodyguard, was familiar with Phil's guns and could have testified that it was not his. And he also advised me, and has written this on his blog, Guilty of Incompetence, that he feels law enforcement retaliated against two of Phil's scientists, Dr. Henry Lee and Dr. Michael Baden. You know, they've investigated the JFK death. They're highly, highly respected individuals. That they retaliated against them for OJ. You know, so these things need to be taken into consideration, and these things are taken into consideration by prosecutors and other people that feel vindictive.
Well, I think, you know, there was the first trial where there was a hung jury, and then there was a second trial where Phil was convicted of second-degree murder. I think just the fact there was a hung jury in the first case shows anyone listening that this is not a cut and dry case. You know, there's definitely reasons to have doubts here, and the forensics especially very dubious. You know, I mean, the character testimony shouldn't count for too much anyway. I think maybe if there is a retrial, they should look into the gun more, bring back the 6 women and really give them a grilling.
The women should not be on the stand. There is a law here in California that you cannot use prior bad acts. That's what they used when they put these women on. It has to be a pattern. So Phil Spector does not have a pattern of putting guns into women's mouths and shooting them. And this was used as character assassination. These women, the judge himself said to the prosecution, you were going down a dangerous legal path, but he permitted it. So what the law here says is you cannot use this type of evidence to assault someone's character. And I have my own theory. Paulette said she feels the judge had it out. I do feel the judge felt he was guilty. These judges can slow trials by permitting testimony. He didn't allow Baby Doll Gibson to testify. He gagged her. She had written a book, and she had evidence, evidently, that Lana Clarkson worked for her as a prostitute. That's highly relevant because he wouldn't have to shoot her for sex, would he? In any event, I also believe there may have been some level of vigilantism. That this man, what the female prosecutor said in closing, is that Phil played Russian roulette with these women. There is no evidence Phil ever played Russian roulette. That's a very vivid, provocative statement. And, you know, they said the 6 women got the bullet. So, you know, maybe a juror felt this is like a man engaged in ongoing domestic violence. He's never arrested. He always gets away. He's got money. And, you know, decided better safe than sorry, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, some of the things that some of the women said, it's obvious they've been coached into saying it, you know, regarding, for example, the sleeping all night in a chair with a handbag. That shows they've been coached. So, you know, you wonder how far that went. Did that one woman suddenly change her story from having an argument with Phil to he held a gun to my head, you know?
Well, you know, Paulette said a couple of things I thought were very insightful, that, you know, these women, maybe for money, maybe for fame, maybe for whatever, some sold their stories. One has been discredited, Melissa Grosvenor, as, you know, basically embezzling money and stealing from a judge, etc. Paulette knows Dorothy Melvin, never once heard about a gun. The woman has stayed here at her house. Has she? That was Stephanie Jennings. She knows both of them. She's never heard this negative stuff. So another possibility is, you know, when these detectives come, and I know one showed up at my house unannounced. They said they received an anonymous tip about my friendship with Phil, which I find bizarre. I think it was Leonard Cohen probably. But, you know, they're very compelling. You suddenly have a best friend, yeah? This guy gave me so much attention, he's calling me. And then his report, I don't know if he had it all mixed up or he just, you know, wrote it the way he wanted, didn't resemble our conversation. He didn't note that I called my mom, asked her if she ever heard of Phil holding a gun on me, blah, blah, blah. You know, so I think, like, sometimes people feel that they're getting this attention from these detectives. They're the center of something. And that can be quite seductive. I stopped talking to them. You know, I just felt like the guy told me, oh, he murdered her. You know, it's like, I don't think so, but, you know, I didn't want to talk to him.
Yeah, look, I don't know. I mean, you know Phil Spector better than I do, but I don't know. I mean, the only person who really knows is Phil Spector. But I would say the forensic evidence and some of the things we've talked about, and some of the things I'll be talking about with my researcher, shows that there's enough doubt here that there should probably be a retrial. So let's hope he gets one anyway. But I wanted to thank you both for coming and talking to us today. And if you do have anything else afterwards that you wanted to mention, just drop me a line and I can include it as well.
Okay, and I will send you the email of this gentleman, Janelli, and where the city attorney is encouraging him actively to harass me.
And we'll send Janelli's note to Phil.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and if that Janelli guy is listening,
I'm sure you'll hear from him. He harasses everybody.
Well, I'll be if he does, I'll be putting. We could maybe put one of his emails online so everyone can see it, because I've read one of them and it's pretty vicious and disgusting.
I'm certain that's him. He creates monikers like that. The 14th sheepdog after my teacher's 14th Sharmappa, the 17th whatever it was. And why would a lawyer for 5 years be defending Leonard Cohen and writing legal documents to me?
I don't know, but what that email that I saw, it doesn't matter what anyone's done, what you disagree with about them or anything. There's no excuse for writing that kind of email, so it's disgusting.
And it says I should be murdered and raped, or kill myself. And also, he has written horrendous things for years to both of my sons, including my younger son as a minor. I mean, that is shocking and unconscionable. I mean, for all I know, I don't know him. He could be a sexual predator, right? Luring my minor child. I mean, I couldn't even get law enforcement to do anything.
Yeah, let's hope that situation gets resolved. Let's hope all of these situations get resolved.
Yeah, let's hope it all ends well, Scott. And thank you, because you've given us an opportunity to talk about things that haven't been discussed.
Well, I think it's important. I mean, if you look on the internet, you can see there aren't too many articles about your particular situation, but they're all from Leonard Cohen's angle, really. Most of them.
Well, it's just repeated, Kelley Lynch, who harassed. The theory is this, basically, that I am his ex-lover. I think he had to make that up to make it look disgruntled, who stalked him for tax information, I might note, and wants to attend his concert. I mean, it's really quite ludicrous.
Well, you've had a chance to give your side of the story. Hopefully people will listen to that and make up their own judgments as to whether they think you're insane or not. You certainly don't sound it anyway. But, yeah, thanks again, both of you, for coming on.
Thank you very much, Scott. Have a good evening.
You too, yeah?
Bye.
Okay, goodbye. Okay, and it's goodbye from me as well. Thank you for listening for the last 40 episodes, those that have been with us all the time. If you haven't heard some of the past episodes, go back and listen to them. We're taking a break for a month or two to regroup, to improve previous episodes, and to do some PR and get some more listeners following us. So thanks again. I'll leave you with a letter from Nancy Sinatra to Phil Spector, showing that he had women after him for sure, so he didn't have to worry too much about, keeping people hostage. Nancy, I wasn't too sure about putting this up, but if it's a problem, get in contact with me, scottsentinel9@gmail.com. Anyone who'd like to get in contact, leave a voicemail, use the chat room, send an email, and we'll see you again in the next 40 episodes. Thank you. Goodbye.